Working Better Together. Today we chatted with Breegan Harper, an LA-based culture and onboarding consultant who's worked with small startups like Soda, as well as major tech companies like Amazon.
Every morning. Well, actually,
We're recording.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Cool. Love the mug.
Thank you.
So tell me, how many cups of coffee on these days?
You know, typically now it's 2. It was a bit more. I lived in Seattle for 7 years, which is a huge coffee company or city. So yeah, I definitely was drinking a lot more back then, more coffee, and now I've been actually into matcha, which is good.
Yes, I see this big trend right now. So, but that's a great introduction to today's episode. So I'm Gary, the CEO of High Five, and today we've got Breegan Harper. She's a consultant in the culture and onboarding space and helps various startups in LA. So she's got some amazing experience with some tech giants up the west coast of California, such as Amazon. So without going on too much further, I mean, it's great to have you on the show. Tell us more about yourself and how you go into the people and culture space. We're keen to hear your story,
Yeah, definitely. So I started off my career working mostly in the recruiting and people operations space. I am fascinated by people, and I really find a lot of value in working directly with people, and worked in that space and in kind of the culture and onboarding and new hire experience programs for several years. And then I left the tech giant world and actually went on a solo trip through Europe and really just took some time to think about, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to dive right into another company, or am I ready to do something where I take my experience and what I've learned and kind of apply it to lots of different avenues? So I started consulting, and one of the first companies that I met and started working with was Soda. I met them actually when I was traveling through London, and it just happened that they were about to start hiring a bunch of people and needed someone with my expertise in terms of, building a new hire experience and building people operations. And so they asked me to start consulting with them, and that just kicked off a wonderful relationship where I'm here in Los Angeles and they're in London. And I started taking on some clients in Los Angeles as well. And so it kind of just snowballed, to be honest.
And that's exciting. So obviously you've been involved in larger organizations, and now you're getting involved in smaller startups, So, I mean, what would you see as how critical is the culture, within the smaller to the larger organizations? Or maybe in a better question is do you think startups even have an advantage there,
I do think startups have an advantage in one sense. They are a clean slate. A chance to bring something completely new into the world, whether it's a product or a business model or a service or what have you, as well as, kind of a chance to stop and think about, okay, how do we want to define our culture and what it means to work here? And often startups, begin with just a few people. And so having less people who, are really passionate about something that they're doing, I think gives the advantage in terms of them being able to say, let's just have a clean slate here and perhaps take lessons learned from other experiences or companies that they've worked at before, or their background, but without all the red tape and bureaucracy that sometimes is found in larger companies. And they have a chance to be a bit more free that way.
When you mean free, did you think that the startups have the flexibility to hire quicker and make the onboarding process smoother? Do you feel like the large organizations take their time?
I think it's twofold. Yes, often startups will hire quickly because there are less people to meet, and the process can be a lot faster. I think that the slow process of hiring that some companies have in place are done with intention and with a purpose. And I don't necessarily think one is better than the other. I think that definitely startups have more on the line. And so they're in a position where, they're wanting to, they have a set amount of work, and, they need the people to fill in the gaps to do the work. And so, actually then it comes down to the fact that retaining employees is very important as well in the startup world. And of course it is in larger corporations, but they're just very different, aren't they?
Yeah, and I mean that's quite. Have you learned? I mean, what learnings have you taken from the process? You know, like in terms of from the onboarding to the recruiting. What would you compare to best practice to what's happening with the future with the recruitment right now?
Yeah, one of the biggest things I learned all in several of my experiences is that it's so important to see the new hire experience as almost a psychological journey that somebody goes on, and it starts the moment they sign an offer or the moment they have an offer. The moment somebody sees themselves and pictures themselves at a company and has, it's going to become a reality. They have an offer that kickstarts the new hire experience. And so everything from then on, even when it comes down to how they sign the offer and what's communicated to them about salary and role expectations, and even things as simple as, hey, on your first day, here's what to expect, or here's how to get to the building. Those all play such a vital role in a person's onboarding experience. And there's so much data around the fact that somebody's first 3 months can determine the retention level. A very large amount of people, I believe it's over half of senior leaders will often leave in their first year at a new company. And a lot of that has to do with the onboarding process in general, and how, role expectations and relationships in the company are explained to them. And yeah, you can do a lot to prevent burnout, I think, in that first month or so.
It's funny that you mentioned it's probably quite similar to product. I mean, you're mentioning an onboarding experience, and obviously most products, whether it be High Five or Airbnb, the most critical part is the onboarding experience. If you have a bad experience with an app, there's a really good chance you're going to shut it down and probably uninstall it. And I guess the same would apply to employees. It's critical to keep them around. Tell me, it's quite an interesting thing for us we've experienced now with hiring up and scaling quite quickly is the mention of CVs. Do you think CVs are still relevant today?
CVs?
Yeah. Or resumes, you could call
Yes, I do. I think that I do believe, it's funny, I am right now in the process of looking over a recent graduate's resume. She asked me to look over it for her, and it's kind of contained to one page, and in kind of that resume format, which is great. Though resumes and CVs, I think there are some notions around it, like it has to be one page or it has to be this certain way. And the biggest thing that I experienced as I had a brief stint doing some recruiting and, have recruited for teams of mine in the past, is the biggest thing that I want to know is or what I'm looking for in a resume is hopefully it's easy to read, because there are several of them, coming at you at the same time. And that, they're clear about the responsibilities and growth that somebody's had in their career, in a role, even if it's small things, for folks who are early in their career. And also kind of a keen interest or an aptitude for expanding beyond just their scope of work. So, in CVs and resumes, always putting things in there that kind of show that you go above and beyond. But yeah, I mean, I do think resumes and CVs have a place, but at the same time, some of the best opportunities that I've come by have been, through real relationships that I've had with people who really know me deeply and know what motivates me and the way that I work, and have worked with me in the past and have said, hey, I really, think that you would connect well with this company or with this person. And so I've found more success in terms of finding people who I really connect with that way, because, relationships are a lot stronger, I think, than a CV.
Exactly, yeah.
Authentic relationships.
Because we went to a university, a post-grad show, and there was us being a startup, and there was obviously many larger companies, and we thought, you know what, we don't have the capacity and time to take in CVs and people, so we literally put a simple form online saying, we're looking for great people. We're not interested in CVs. just tell us something about yourself, what you've accomplished, and put a link
Mm-hmm.
to your website, or your portfolio or your GitHub account if you're an engineer. And it was amazing, the experience from the employees. They were like, they chose us as opposed to a large corporate, just for the sake of, okay, you value what I've done, you valued my experience over my skills, and I think that stood out, and I think it feels like it's standing out more and more. So that
Yeah, it's
becoming
interesting.
workforce, yeah.
And that shows that people throughout the recruiting process, and then even when they get to a company and are working somewhere, what people are really interested in is, am I valued? Is, what I put forth into the world, is this being valued, and is it of value, and how can I develop it? And that's just a human nature thing, I think.
Yeah.
And there's, I think, ways to really capture that and create cultures that really foster that in companies, definitely.
Yeah. And then, tell me, I mean, you're obviously, your expertise is getting people in and making sure the onboarding experience is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But then in terms of like retaining that culture and keeping that culture alive, like, is there any like trends that you're seeing right now that within smaller companies that they could improve on, or even larger companies? And maybe even a better question is there anything that the larger companies can teach, the smaller companies can teach the larger companies in retaining and keeping amazing culture?
I think it goes back to what I said earlier around people really being the most interested in, am I being valued, and am I going to grow? Yeah. And so, in terms of what smaller companies can teach larger companies, often, there's better lines of communication if people are working in a small company right in the thick of it, in a small office with their team. I know so many companies right now are distributed, but we rely on things like Slack and all of that to really be in constant communication with each other, because in small companies, your team is really all you have. Not to say that's not the case in larger companies, but I think that having more open lines of communication are really important in companies in general, whether they're large or small. And I think that, of course, there's a lot of value in having things such as performance reviews and, a way to approach managers when you have an issue and all of that. But at the same time,
feedback.
Right. Constant feedback. And really, I think just to focus on developing relationships with people. When you're working at a company, you're there for most of your time. You're spending most of your time there. And so developing real relationships with people, whether they're the CEO or your direct manager or your teammates or somebody who you could potentially mentor, who's, coming in and is a bit newer in their career, I think the impetus should really be on relationship building.
Yeah, because we haven't been replaced by robots or AI. So let's all just stay human a little bit longer.
Absolutely, yeah. The robots have a time and a place, but there will always be humans.
And then tell me, just in terms of like where you are right now and where you've come from, like, is there anything that, like, that you've learned through the process that you would have done differently?
Through the process of
recruiting and onboarding.
What the biggest thing that I continually return to is this sense of balance, right? I think that I sometimes will encounter companies, whether I'm working with them or just, have friends who work in companies that are more startup, smaller, and really almost averse to the notion of being too structured, and which is nice because everybody's having fun and, maybe numbers are good for a while, but that's not necessarily a sustainable model, because as soon as you start growing, it's harder to kind of retain that very free and easy, vibe, I guess, in the company. It's a big word these days.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes companies will sort of inject corporate structure then into something that's more of a startup, less structured model. And that doesn't necessarily work. And so what I what I found is, and what I continually return to and have learned is that it's so important to start out in terms of, developing recruiting models or recruiting values and company values from the beginning with a balance between structure and, freedom and culture and creativity and all of those things. They kind of have to go hand in hand because when people feel safe, when there are structures and processes that allow people to feel safe and know their value and know where they stand within a company, they are able to be more free and more creative and are more apt to want to build relationships with people because there's less of this. Okay, I'm not really wrapping my head around what this culture is. I don't really know where I stand, and so I think the biggest thing that I try to work with companies on is this notion of balance between structure and process and kind of the fun, fluffy stuff at the same time, which is wonderful and I think important. But those things really have to go hand in hand, and that's found in really defining company values from the get-go that are strong and sustainable, whether it's a company of 5 people or whether it's potentially going to grow to 500. Those values are so important because then they're a guide for decisions that you make in hiring, in business strategy, and all of that. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, it's so true. You know what? I actually, I've got 2 kids, and actually, when they were growing up, and they still are, I mean, they're only 10 and 13, but there's this talk of obviously boundaries and putting things in place.
Mm-hmm.
And someone put an awesome picture and explained this amazing picture. They said there's these kids in a playground, right? And and they did a few experiments, and they're all playing on a big jungle gym in the middle there, a little bit of a play center. And what they found is that none of the kids played on the outside area of the grass. And then what they did is they put a fence around the outside. And what they did is it allowed the kids to know how far they can go and where their boundaries are. And then they played and they used the whole field. And it's such a good analogy, to go, okay, if people know where their boundaries are in their framework, they can actually push them further and actually make the most of the organization, make the most of the play.
Right.
So it's actually very, very interesting. So
absolutely.
I know time is running out. Wow, that went really quickly. So I just want to ask you a final few questions. I mean, tell us, how do you spend your day on average? Waking up in the morning and drink your coffee out of that amazing
drinking my coffee. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. So to be honest, I had to redefine my routine or my practices and be very diligent about it. I wake up every morning around the same time and make my coffee, often go for a walk and start my day, and then either settle down here at my home office, or we'll go over on site and work with, if I'm working with a client here in Los Angeles, we'll go on site there. I often have meetings throughout the day, of coffees with people, kind of trying to just idea share, ideate together of people who are in similar spaces. But to be honest, it can sometimes be a bit random, but the beginning is always the same. So I have to kind of have some routine there and then, just choose to do whatever is needed that day.
Brilliant. And then tell me, what's some of your recent favorite reading material?
I'm obviously fascinated by kind of how humans work within companies and how people find value in work. And so I'm reading right now, I'm in the middle of reading a book called How to Find Fulfilling Work by Roman Kurznerek. It's incredible. And then also there's a book by Patrick Lencioni called The Advantage. I have it right here. It's called The Advantage. And it's just a brilliant book on organizational health, especially from the leadership perspective and how leadership teams and the health of those teams impact the rest of the company. And it's really brilliant.
Wow. Okay. Well, definitely I'll add that to my Goodreads list.
Definitely.
And any software, what's your main source of productivity, that you use every day?
Right. I'm very simple. I use Google Calendar for all of my meetings, and Asana for project work. If I'm kicking off a project with a company, it's so much easier, especially since I work remotely often, to just, build out a sprint project and assign tasks that way. And I, live and breathe Asana when I'm in the middle of a project.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks for joining us today. It was amazing. How
Yeah.
can the audience reach out to you?
So it's just my first and last name, breeganharper@gmail.com, and that's
Brilliant.
me.
Cool. Thanks a lot. High five.
Awesome.